To debate Nigel's explosive interview is the media commentator Rafe Heydel-Mankoo and also Abdullah Al-Andalusi, the co-founder of the Muslim Debate Initiative. Let's start with you, Abdullah. So, the cat's been put amongst the pigeons once again by Nigel Farage. A lot of people saying his comments were horribly Islamophobic and racist. Would you agree with that?
I would say that many people have described what he said as race baiting or religious baiting, because most people who are Muslim in this country were from immigrant background or recent immigrant backgrounds, and so they are a convenient target. 150 years ago, Oswald Mosley and Nigel Farage of his time, one might argue, from the British Union of Fascists, argued that Jews were a problem in this country and that there was a large population who weren't assimilating or didn't follow British values. So here we are in somewhat repeating history again with this. And one of the most dangerous things I noticed from Nigel Farage's comments was he was criticizing anti-genocide, anti-apartheid protests in Palestine. Is it British values then? If they are the ones who are meant to be against British values, is Nigel Farage saying that to be British is to be supporting genocide and apartheid?
Well, hang on.
I think that's very worrying.
The anti-Semitism, the rise of fascism on British streets, it isn't coming from people like Nigel Farage. It's coming from the Islamists.
Well, fascism is to say that the country is more important than individual rights and so on. So anyone who says that this country should come first beyond people's individual rights or freedoms is by definition, or the state should come first, is by definition a fascist. So that wouldn't apply. Secondly, anti-Semitism, just show one clip of someone attacking all Jews, insulting Jews or inciting people to hate Jews in any one of these demonstrations. We all hear a lot of rhetoric from...
Somebody said gas the Jews. Somebody's wearing a Hamas sign. Children dressed as fancy dress Hamas terrorists.
Then we have to see the video, show the video where someone said gas the Jews. Right, because I would equally condemn that, like anyone else here. That would be abhorrent, but we haven't seen any evidence. All we hear
is there. It happened on the first weekend. It's not rumours. It's there. The evidence is crystal clear.
Then show the video.
Well, we haven't got it now, but it's out there. You can Google it. Rafe Heydel-Mankoo. Do you want to counter this?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, it goes without saying that the majority of Muslims in this country are well integrated and adjusted, and that should be celebrated. But people constantly say, oh, it's a small minority who are like this. It's not. It's a very sizable minority of the Muslim population of this country hold views, attitudes and beliefs that run completely contrary to our civilization and our culture. And it's not getting better. People used to say, oh, well, this is just first immigration Muslims. Their children and grandchildren will be very different. On the contrary, it's the children today who hold far more radical views than their parents or grandparents. I mean, there was one poll done by the Policy Exchange that showed, this is quite unbelievable, 1/3 of young British Muslims aged 16 to 24 believe ex-Muslims should be put to death for apostasy. This is quite amazing. A majority of British Muslims believe that homosexuality should be illegal, compared to 5% of the broader population. 3/4 of British Muslims in this last poll do not believe that Hamas committed murder and rape on October the 7th. Now, you might think that's a bizarre thing for them to believe, but it's actually in keeping with previous polls. 31% of British Muslims believe that America was behind 9/11. 7% believe it was the Jews. Only 4% believe it was Al-Qaeda, which of course we know. More Muslims also believe that Diana was killed because she wanted to marry a Muslim than believe she was killed in an accident. Now, those are just the most bizarre things. But then you look further and you see that 62% of Muslims want to restrict free speech in order to protect religious sensitivities. 52% believe that there should be no picture of Muhammad shown. Every gauge you look at, most scarily, 9% of British Muslims, 400,000 people, identify as being Islamists and supporters of terrorism, and 15% sympathise with terrorism, compared to 6% in France and Germany. And 81% of British Muslims identify as Muslim first and British second, whereas it's only 66% in Germany and it's only 46% in France. We have a real issue here which we need to address, and we can't keep covering these things up.
Abdullah, that's a barrage of data. How would you respond to that?
Okay, yeah, and in this very same poll, twice as many of the non-Muslim public, British public that was polled, were likely to support ISIS than Muslims. That's in,
polls.
That's in the same poll, right?
These are 5 polls.
Well, we're talking about the one you referenced. So in this poll, you get some very weird data coming out. But that's beside the point. The point is that Muslims, if you ask religious Jews who have very similar laws and beliefs to Muslims, will say very much the same thing. They're going to say they're Jewish first and maybe British second. It was a big debate amongst Jews for many decades, and there are sizable portions of Jewish people that believe that they're Jewish first, and they even have gone to the Israeli. Let me finish.
It's double
They
the rate of France.
have gone to participate in the Israeli Defense Forces to fight as reservists for Israel, but they're not reservists in Britain. They would not fight for Britain, or they have not fought for Britain. These very same people. Why don't you see any complaint against their patriotism and their nationalism?
Because I don't recall Jews blowing themselves up. I don't recall Jews beheading anybody. I don't recall Jews flying planes into buildings. So that's, I think, one of the differences that we have here.
It's not talking about Jews here, but Zionists have in the past killed British politicians throughout the Palestine struggles. They called it. They supported actual terrorism, blowing up King David Hotel. They supported and funded internationally terrorist operations against British army in Israel and Palestine. And you know that.
Abdullah, if we pull this into the here and the now,
right,
rather than dredging through history, the violence on British streets, the unrest on British streets, the soaring
like the fox hunting protests and demonstrations that led to 60 police officers being injured.
Hang on a moment. Every Saturday in Britain, we are seeing the protests now. We're seeing soaring anti-Semitism. We're seeing politicians being forced out of office. We're seeing politicians and David Amos being killed. There is a commonality amongst that. You must admit, these figures are damning. And I particularly want to ask you, why is it that young British Muslims seem to be especially radicalised when compared to the older Muslims? I find that surprising. Why is that happening?
Firstly, I think that this is all a red herring. People are entitled to religious views in England.
And these
religious views might be what you might call conservative or ultra-orthodox, depending on, and they will be at odds with the liberal ideals of liberal values.
Sharia law is orthodox. That's the point. That's against the law of the land.
But not on non-Muslims, right? And then no one ever said they wanted to live by Sharia law. Jews want to live by Halakha law, Jewish law, and they even have Beit Deens, which is Jewish courts that resolve disputes in this country. So no one complains about that. Well, at least not now. The British Union of Fascists 150 years, 20 years ago did complain about that, and of course we're seeing history repeat itself. The issue is this: if Jews can have these things, if Jews can live in Stamford Hill, Golders Green, and have their own culture, and relatively they even have their own like a security force called the Shomrim, and that's not a problem, and great, and I support that.
Okay,
why can't Muslims have the same?
I want to pull this conversation now, if I could, back to Nigel Farage's comments. I know you put a post out about that. Extraordinary. It's been taken down.
I put a tweet out defending Nigel Farage, and all I did was I provided some of the same statistics. And simply for telling the truth today, you get silenced. Because I think it's almost as if the establishment elite understand that multiculturalism has failed and that Islam is a tinderbox waiting to go off, and they're treading on eggshells around it. And it reminded me precisely of the last 30 years in Rotherham and Oldham, when the police, the social services, the councils were petrified by political correctness and so beholden to this ideology of multiculturalism that they allowed the industrial-scale rape of young British girls by Pakistani Muslims for fear of inflaming community tensions. That's why Nigel Farage and I are getting silenced for speaking the truth. We have imported vast numbers of people into this country who have no intention of assimilating. They live segregated lives in Islamic silos whose daily lives pass with little or no interaction with wider British society. And they exist in a world that's almost like a petri dish.
Would you say Stamford Hill?
1 second, let me finish the point.
Silo.
In these communities, they're like petri dishes where abhorrent cultural practices are being practiced. Forced marriages, honour killings. Britain is now the global centre of acid attacks. We've already spoken about the grooming gangs that are taking place. These are abhorrent practices. We know full well that Muslims living in these communities are twice as likely to be extremists as those living in non-segregated communities, and we're only making this worse by continuing mass immigration.
Final word to you, Abdullah. I want to try and get you to respond to what Nigel Farage said. Nigel Farage speaking out, it's put the cat amongst the pigeons. Is it helpful, yes or no?
All I'm saying is that I feel that he's scared to use those same standards he levels against Muslims, against Jews, for doing exactly the same thing in terms of what you might call living in Golders Green and so on. Would you call that a silo? You wouldn't. You wouldn't dare, because you'd be called anti-Semite and you would hate that.
How many acid attacks are in Golders Green?
You said if England's the global leader in acid attacks, then and it's not the Muslim world, then clearly that it's not got nothing to do with Islam or Muslims.
The Asian community.
Anyway,
please address what Nigel said. Is it helpful or not? I mean, he's speaking truth, but...
well, I think we have to ask ourselves, is Nigel out for the rights of the British citizen, the rights of the British citizen to protest and demonstrate? No police are injured or attacked every week on the Palestine demonstration and protest. Yet on fox hunting, the demonstrations that he attended, in one case there was a riot in Parliament Square where 60 police were injured, MPs' houses were barricaded by fox hunting protesters, right? Anti-ban protesters. Okay. And yet he supports that. But yet, peaceful protests go out for Palestine, and he wants to clamp down. The question is, does he have British citizens' rights in his mind as his number one concern, or does he have Israel or other foreign countries' governments' ideas that he wants to promote?
We have to leave it there. All I'll say in response to that is, I pleaded with the police to stop people putting that sign on Big Ben when it happened from River to the Sea. I said to them, there's a projector, go and take it down. They would not. They soft soap it. People find it grossly offensive, and many feel it's shame.
And guess what? Guess what rights and freedom is all about? Rights and freedom is to have the freedom to do something, even despite people find it grossly offensive. Looks like you guys have issue with British values.
Well, it's not a British value.
Not Muslim, because you're
defending freedom and liberty. Yes,
all GB News does, it talks about banning this, banning that, that problem, this, a problem with that, and that they should clamp down on this, on the rights of British citizens to protest or demonstrate, when there's clearly no anti-Semitism there. Not a single smoking gun you can present on camera. Just rumours. Oh, we hear there's anti-Semitism happening. Not a single time, not a single image you can show.
Okay, so that gas the Jews comment was in Australia, I believe. It was broadcast.
Well, we're talking about Britain, but anyway,
but the children dressed as Hamas terrorists, that was very much in Britain. In fact, the police posed for pictures with them. We have to leave it there.
There was the demonstrators physically attacking, brutalising students at UCL in America. No one talks about that.
We have to leave it there. Rafe Heydel-Mankoo and Abdullah Al-Andalusi, co-founder of the Muslim Debate Initiative. A lively debate. Thank you both very much.